Hey guys, you may have just heard President Donald J. Trump announced a 100% tariff on all chips manufactured outside of the US coming into the US. Now, as usual, this is a Trump type of thing, a very Trumpian type of thing. It's a very severe threat, something that would make all of our electronics prohibitively expensive, right? But it's very loose on details, i.e., no implementation date, no exact details of how, who this would affect, okay? And apparently there is an out to this tariff. And the out is, and I'm not joking, what it appears to be, is that the CEOs of American companies who import these devices need to speak with President Donald J. Trump himself, give him a large figure that they plan on investing into the American country, that he can then go before the press and tout as being his achievement. And of course, they have to kiss his ring and say what a great president he is and how he's making America great again. Now, if you think that's a joke, just go and look at the announcement. When he said this, he touted Apple, and Apple did those exact things I just stated. Now, the problem with all of this is that, one, it's really just a joke then, if that's all they have to do, because it's not too big of a deal. I mean, it is if you have pride, but we know that American CEOs will not have any pride. They will be happy to kiss the ring. And two, it's a distraction. Because while they're trying to say, hey, look over here, there was another escalation in the chip war between America and China. And this escalation over here is a very big deal. In fact, if you are for chip wars, which I'm not, you may or may not know, my philosophy that I created is called MAGA, make the US great again by making us great again. Us being us and the rest of the world. Win-win cooperation, win-win trade deals between the United States and everybody else. Never happen as long as we're in empire mode. But that's my philosophy. But if you believe in a trade war, right, this may be the moment that you look back and say that the United States lost it with China over chips, okay? So we're going to discuss that. But first, I want to welcome you to Ruben Tech, where we discuss the intersection of tech, politics, and finance. Today, we're going to be discussing two of them, tech and politics. And if you haven't already, I need you to subscribe down below. Please hit that subscribe button. We're on our way to 10,000. Just take a moment, hit that button. Thank you very much. Okay, now moving on. So what just happened? Basically, I'm trying to think if I should give you the history first. I'm not going to. The United States allowed Nvidia to ship H20s back into China, and China inspected the newest imports of these chips, and they found what may be either a kill switch or a backdoor. And so they have summoned Jensen Huang over to speak to them to explain what these are. Now, why would this be the death blow that I speak of? So I want to explain. Understand that before the United States initiated this chip war against China, and understand 100% that we are the ones that did it, okay? Before we started this, I shouldn't say before because it was an ongoing process, but there was a time that Chinese giants such as Huawei, ZTE, et cetera, were happy using American technologies. So for example, Huawei was using the Android operating system on its phones. And a lot of Chinese companies today still use Android. In fact, besides Huawei, I think all of them do. They use a version of Android. Now, Android is an open source platform, i.e., Google maintains the project, but they don't have control of it. You can fork it and you can do whatever you want with it, okay? And Huawei had, done a lot of good things with Android, and they had actually contributed back a lot to the Android ecosystem, which is the benefit of open source. I'm not going to explain all of that right now, open source versus closed source, but let's just say that a lot of times the benefit of open source is that people who utilize it will also say, hey, I like this project, I want to see it keep going, and so they will contribute back to it. And Huawei was doing that. And so they were happy using Android because Google led the base of this project, so they were taking on the majority of the expense in creating something like this. And of course, creating an operating system is extremely expensive. Huawei could take it, they could do as they saw fit with it. They didn't have to use Google services if they didn't want to. They, if they saw something in there they didn't like, they could modify it and create their own code, right? So they could use it as they see fit. So it saved them costs. It gave them a lot of flexibility. And for Google, the win is that their ecosystem is spreading throughout the world. So Huawei is on a Google standard that they're setting through Android. So understand that the direction of Android was shipped and shaped essentially by Google, because they would create the basic, the most internal stuff to it, like the kernel and stuff like that. Well, actually, that's Linux. But anyways, we're not going to get too deep into it other than to say that Google is the main shaper of the Android future, okay? And so this is a win-win situation for both companies. But then President Donald J. Trump, well, actually, President Joe Biden decided, hey, we're going to arrest Meng. And now, technically, it wasn't over technology. It was over the sanctions to Iran. But essentially, it has to do with the chip war. So they arrested the Huawei princess. It's just complete BS move. And then President Donald J. Trump upped the ante by literally sanctioning private companies and Huawei, ZTE, and Xiaomi. Now, Xiaomi later on got out of those sanctions, but Huawei did not. And so what happened there was he said, hey, Google, Huawei can no longer use Android. Okay, so Google had to say, sorry, Huawei, we cannot allow you to use this, even though it's an open source project. Anything that we push here on forward, you're not going to be able to use. Very odd thing, actually, when you look at it. But also, what happened there too was that the Dutch company ASML was no longer allowed to service their agreement or sell any new of their most advanced EUV lithography machines to China. ARM was not allowed to sell any of their ISA's instruction set architecture, their newest versions. They were able to honor their previous ones, but not sell anything new to China. So all these types of things were hit on Huawei in the effort to cripple Huawei. And then when Joe Biden got in, he even did more dumb things. Actually, sorry, Meng was arrested under Trump also, not under Joe Biden. That was wrong. When Joe Biden got in, he decided to up the ante, and he actually put export controls on American companies. So he said, hey, American companies, you cannot ship your most advanced chips to Huawei. So he said, Nvidia and AMD, your AI accelerators, your best ones, you have to keep out of Chinese hands. You can sell them essentially 2.5 generations ago, okay? Why do I say 2.5 generations? Well, up until last year, Nvidia was allowed to sell something called H800s, and they were starting to sell H20s into China. H stands for Hopper. However, the Hopper series, the premier chip, the standard chip is the H100. The 800s were reduced versions, and the 20s were better than the 800s, but they still were not as good as the 100s. Specifically, they were created with the restriction for AI training of the loads. However, it did end up where they were better at inferencing. So that's neither here or there. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But the Hopper series is a generation back. Right now in America, we're able to buy the Blackwell series of chips, the B100 and B200, and that's paired with Grace CPU for the Grace Blackwell system, okay? So Hopper would be second generation, and then these were reversed, so 2.5 generations ago. And so that was the chip they were allowed to sell. AMD had something similar going on, and still the Chinese had a big market for this, because when it comes to the type of things like this, actually having the latest chip isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is the amount of compute that you can have, and the amount of compute that you have is based on the amount of the cost per watt, or not cost per watt, just cost. Let's say cost. It actually is cost per watt, but well, no, it's just cost. Sorry, it's just cost. And the reason it's just cost is in America, it's cost per watt because electricity is expensive, and so we're always trying to get things more performant per watt. But in China, their electricity is so much cheaper that they get more computability per dollar, per US dollar equivalent, even if it's using more wattage. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So the Chinese firms are still happy to have these because they said, oh, it doesn't matter if they're not quite as good as Blackwell, because all we need is a certain amount of computation, and this computation we're not going to pay any more for. We might even pay less, because the big cost is electricity of running these things. That's actually the main cost. And our electricity over here is so much cheaper that it offsets the cost of the chips themselves. So there is a huge market for these chips in China. And of course, that upset the Trump administration, the Biden administration. And so Biden decided, I'm going to segregate the entire world. This is how America thinks. We're going to create a three-tiered world. One tier, good countries like us. Second tier, not as good countries. Third tier, they're not even human, right? Just absolutely ridiculous notion. And Trump came in and tried to sound like a good guy and said, this is a bad idea, which it was, right? But then what did he do? He completely shut off all H20 shipments to Huawei. Or, sorry, not to Huawei, to China. So it's like, he did something smart in saying the segregation of the world is a dumb thing. Yeah, hey, that's good. We all agree with that. Then he said, but I'm going to further strengthen export controls. And now even the H20s cannot be shipped over to China. And so Nvidia was left unhooked with $4.5 billion of chips that had planned to ship to China that couldn't. They actually had to take another $1.5 billion loss over the next 2 months. And America was left with this policy of, hey, we're going to try to restrict the Chinese by not letting them have access to anything. But there was a problem. And the problem was Huawei. And Huawei was like, oh, look at this, a huge opportunity. Understand that when the US started sanctioning Huawei, they thought Huawei would die, but they didn't. What they did is they made Huawei more resilient. And Huawei was never incentivized. They didn't have to be incentivized to create an OS back when they were using Android. Because it's like, hey, we're under a MAGA philosophy, make us great again. Everyone's working in harmony. This is best for the world. We'll focus on what we want to do. You focus on that. We work together, kumbaya. And then Americans came in and said, no kumbaya. We can't have kumbaya. We destroy kumbaya. Haven't you seen our actions? We hate peace. We're going to try to destroy you, right? And so they destroyed that cooperation. And Huawei, instead of dying, shriveling up and dying, which is what everyone expected, from the empire, they said, no, we're resilient. And they went ahead and they developed their own OS, Harmony OS. But they didn't just do that, because remember, it wasn't just the operating system. I'm giving that as an example. It was also the chipsets, right? They couldn't use the ASML lithography. They couldn't use the ISAs over from ARM. So they said, we have to work on this too. And so over the years, they have been building from the ground up their own chip architecture and their own supply chains. Okay? They're becoming self-sufficient for chips entirely within China. They're not quite there yet, but they're almost there. And if they do that, mind you, nobody in the world is at that level. Okay? It's absolutely incredible. So Huawei saw this opportunity and they released their CM384 accelerator a little bit early. It might have been a mistake because they weren't able to ship as many as they wanted to. But neither here nor there. They're like, look at this opportunity we have in the market. We have a product that gives you the same performance and computation as the Nvidia NVL72, the premier device from Nvidia, right? It has 72 Blackwell chips in it, just, greatest Blackwell units. Absolutely a monster machine, and the Huawei CM384 Cloud Matrix was able to match it in performance. They put 384 900 accelerators into a machine, and they were able to match it in performance. Now, of course, they weren't able to match it performance per watt, but again, in China, that does not matter as much because their electricity costs are so much more efficient, okay? And Jensen started saying, hey guys, this isn't smart. You're handing this year predicted to be $40 billion market. You're handing this entire AI accelerator chip space to Huawei on a platter. You really want to hand them $40 billion more dollars, right? With no competition? That isn't smart. Because Jensen knows that even if you're going to fight a chip war, surprisingly enough, it's like actually cooperation, because ultimately you want people using your standards. Remember I said earlier that the good thing for Google was that Huawei is using Android, thus they're using Android standards. It helps build the ecosystem. Well, that's the same thing with AI and these AI chips. Okay, NVIDIA has something called CUDA. And CUDA gets you to vendor lock-in. And what's vendor lock-in? Well, vendor lock-in is that basically in software and hardware, not hardware so much, but in software. Once you start using something, you get locked into the system. There's all these things into it that go into your system. Imagine it as like hooks in your skin that they put in there. And so when you want to leave that ecosystem, you have to rip it away. It's like ripping your flesh off, okay? And so it's really hard to change. In fact, there's companies like Oracle that make vendor lock-in their entire experience, and then they charge you exorbitant fees. But you don't have to charge fees for vendor lock-in. You can offer a free product, and because you can make your money elsewhere. So like with Nvidia, they don't charge for CUDA because they don't need to, because they're like, once you're in CUDA is optimized for our chips. You must buy our chips. So Nvidia is like, hey, Trump, you see this? You're handing this entire market over to Huawei. You should be asking them to buy our chips, because then they're going to be using our CUDA software and they'll be stuck with our standards, right? And he wasn't wrong. This is actually what you want. And plus, he was also saying that the best way to compete with Huawei is to compete with them in a free and open market, which of course he's right about that too. And so then that was falling on deaf ears until David Sachs, the AI czar under the Trump administration, basically said the same thing. And so the Trump administration went ahead and they realized, oh, yep, if we want to keep Huawei down, this is not the way to do it, by handing them all this resource. Chinese market right now, estimated $40 billion on AI accelerators this year. Chinese market in 2030 for all chips, not just AI accelerators, but for all chips, estimated at $300 to $400 billion. Can you imagine if Huawei controlled that entire market? They would be unstoppable. Literally unstoppable. So here you have Trump then walk back and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do China a favor. We're going to do China. I love China. China loves me. I do. Nobody in the history of mankind has done more for China than I have. I've done more for China than anybody. We're going to sell H-20s back into China. Right? And guess what they did? Because they could not resist, they put a backdoor in there. It appears that they put a backdoor. You may say, what's a backdoor? Well, a backdoor is it allows them to spy, surveil on you, or allows them to have a kill switch where they can turn your technology off. And of course, the Chinese were going to inspect these first shipments. And of course, they found it. And the irony in this is that the entire thing our government said, the funniest part about this is we can't use Huawei because Huawei has backdoors in everything they sell. But the thing was, they never showed it. They never proved that Huawei had a backdoor in anything. If you're out there, you're a mega buff, show me one case, show me one detailed report with proof that Huawei had a backdoor in any item that we were using over in America or in Europe. Show me. You can't, because they never had proof of anything. Just like when they sanctioned Huawei in April and said that nobody in the world, talk about overreach, nobody in the world can use the Ascend 900 accelerators. They accused Huawei of stealing American technology. They said it's alleged, but that's still an accusation. And they had no proof, none, zero, zilch. And still, to this day, they provided no proof. So mind you, that they're telling you you can't use these chips because they have backdoors in them. And because that's so terrible. Can you imagine that? America would never do that. We'd never put a backdoor into anything. Oh, wait, Jensen, you can start selling these H-20s, but we need you to take some time. In fact, it makes you think, was that their plan the entire time? To pause the shipments of the H-20s to put these backdoors into them. Was that their plan? Because from, at least on the surface level, remember, these are alleged. The Chinese government is going to meet with Jensen. So it appears to be a backdoor. We don't know 100%. Unlike in America, they don't just make accusations baselessly. They're bringing Jensen in to talk with them. Okay? And over in China, they're very serious about these things, so they will have technical experts. Unlike in America, where when you see our CEOs grilled by our House of Representatives and stuff, you see basically idiots that know nothing about what they're talking about. And CEOs are usually left dumbfounded, like, what on earth are you asking me? But we're telling them, was that the whole plan, to go ahead, stop those shipments and put those backdoors in, if they're there? I do want to say it is alleged, but the irony in all of this, it's just, I mean, you could cut it so thick. I got a screwdriver here. I could poke the screwdriver, just drill it into the irony of all this, right? So Huawei, which they've never shown to have any kind of surveillance, backdoor, kill switch in their technology, can't use their products. We're going to sanction them to death, right? As an American, I technically could buy a Huawei phone, but I'm actually afraid to, because remember, on the sanction list, I know I could buy an older one, but I can't buy a new one. I could, but I'm afraid to, because on the sanction list, it just says that this list could be changed at any time. They can add, so they have some chips on there that they list, but they say that essentially they could add whatever chip they want to it at any time, is essentially what it says. But so I'm prevented from getting this device because it might use stolen, unproven, that's unproven, surveillance, unproven, or backdoors or a kill switch on it, all unproven, right? And there will never be any proof for any of this. But then we turn around and we do the very things that we're accusing other people of doing. And so why is this the death blow? Why am I saying, and I don't like to exaggerate too much on this show, okay? Why would this be the death blow? It's possible. I'm not saying it is, because it's alleged. Maybe it's not that. Maybe it's something else, an architecture that, that the Chinese are misunderstanding what it is. It's very possible. We're going to find out when Jensen goes before them and speaks. Well, actually, sorry. They'll do it in private. But there will be a statement released to us, I'm sure. So why would this be the death blow? Well, because now, remember I was talking about that market size? So now if you're in China, you're a Chinese firm. You were looking at buying H20s. Let's say you're going to buy a few $100 million of H20s off of Jensen. You're like, yeah, I really need these accelerators. And then all of a sudden you have these planned to be shipped, and what happens? America says, nope, can't get them. Jensen, what's going on? Sorry, I can't do anything, right? Well, shoot, I had plans. I have development I got to do. I got this and that and that and this. Now you're left scrambling, right? So, you're left scrambling, and it's like maybe you're like talking to Huawei, but you're not fully committed because you're using already the Nvidia ecosystem. You're like, boy, to get off of Nvidia would be really tough. Hopefully the Trump administration changes their mind. So Trump administration changes their mind. You're like, yeah, we're good, Jensen. I need my H20s, right? You're in China. I need my H20s. But now you find out there might be a back door in them and a kill switch. And so now you have to look at what happened with ASML. All the people that bought their lithography machines were left in the dark. ASML was prevented. They wanted to service their contracts. Their billions of dollars of equipment served, hundreds of millions of dollars of service contracts they had. They wanted to service their contracts. ASML, a Dutch company, was prevented by the United States from doing such under the export controls. If ASML did that, we, the G7, the Dutch, could arrest them. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine that? That's the most hilarious thing. It's not hilarious. It's so sad. But if ASML, sorry, I was bringing tears back. It's just so ridiculous. If ASML had serviced their contracts with Huawei, their CEO could have been arrested. Absolutely. And that he probably would have been arrested. Maybe the Dutch wouldn't have arrested him. They're a little bit different on that kind of stuff. I don't know. But certainly if he decided to go over to the UK with Starmer or any of the other US's lapdogs, they would have arrested him on sight, like Canada did with Ming. And then they would have twisted every law they had, all because the US invents imaginary laws, right? And invents imaginary morals for the entire world. We set these laws for the world of what's right and what's wrong. But anyways, sorry, I keep getting off on a tangent here. So now if you're in China, you have to say, well, am I going to be left high and dry? Maybe this kill switch will turn off my item. Trump next year will change his mind. He's going to flip the kill switch and kill my item. Maybe Nvidia won't be allowed to service it and I won't be able to use any CUDA. So the CUDA ecosystem that I'm locked into, the only reason I didn't go to Huawei is because I'm in CUDA. And CUDA is much more fleshed out than CAN, C-A-N-N, that's the Huawei ecosystem. And it is. CUDA's been around 15, 20 years. So of course it's going to be the best system out there for AI accelerators. One day I'll explain more about that. I'll talk specifically about CUDA. But maybe I won't get the new updates to CUDA, right? CUDA has a regular schedule of updates that come out. And that's why people use it. It's very dependable. It's very predictable. It's very stable. Of course, until Donald Trump gets his hands in it. President Donald J. Trump literally destroys the dependability, the predictability, the stability of everything. So now you have to say is, maybe I won't even be able to get service with CUDA. Maybe there's surveillance technology in it that my government, the Chinese government, will say this isn't allowable for you to use. Maybe I need to spend my hundreds of millions elsewhere. Maybe even though CUDA has its hooks in me, I have to rip my skin away. Maybe it's a matter of national pride and the simple fact that these warmongers are going on TV and they're going to the Shangri-La conference and they're saying they're going to start war with my country. Maybe that's another incentive for me to not use these chips. Now, I don't think everyone will do that in China, but I think a lot of people will. I think a lot of those maybes will turn into lost sales. And so in 2030, when the Chinese market is estimated 300 to 400 billion total in semiconductors, how much of that market is going to be captured by American firms and how much is going to be captured by Chinese firms? And that's where I'm saying it might be this moment, because it sounded like, from all intents and purposes, it did sound like Nvidia was ready to ship billions of dollars worth of these H20s back into China. So that first blow, probably even the Chinese, some of the execs over there were like, well, this Trump guy, he's unpredictable. He's going to change his mind, you know. But now this, you can't keep going. You can't predict unpredictability, right? So it's like, fool me once, you know, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So this is something that we'll have to keep track of. This is a pivotal moment. It's going to be a big meeting. If you're an Nvidia shareholder, I cover finance too, right, a little bit. If you're an Nvidia shareholder, it's going to be a big deal. Jensen was talking about how he wants to compete with Huawei. So if this happened, I guaranteed it wasn't Jensen saying, yeah, let's put a backdoor in. No, because he knows Jensen's smart. He knows the hardware doesn't matter. It's the standards in the ecosystem. And when I say it doesn't matter, I don't mean literally it doesn't matter at all. Of course, it's important to have good hardware, right? Huawei, you know, Ren Zhengfei, he, you know, very humble guy, came out and said, yeah, you know, Nvidia is the leader in hardware, and we got to catch up to them, and that's very important, and they set the standard. But both of those guys know it's about the ecosystem, okay? So that's what I got for you today. This is an important moment. If we look back 5 years from now, are we, America, going to regret doing exactly what we accused others of doing, but never showed that they were doing? So we accuse these other peoples of doing this. We accuse them, we never showed it, never proved it. We accuse them of doing it. And now it appears we might be doing exactly what we accused them of. Thank you for watching the show. I hope all of you out there have a great day.